Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view The Collection. So, this movie, of course, is a sequel to the film The Collector. And, gotta say, for this movie, who was to state that the writers who went on and did Saw were to, of course, be tied to this movies, you could really tell with the sequel. Because in The Collector, we focus on giving people backstory. It's very slow and marinating, and like people are to take their time and so on and so forth. Whereas The Collection is very rushed, and there's a whole sequence that is to be with that rave. Where I was like, why wasn't that a lot longer? Why wasn't that really milked out more? But I think a lot of it is to be blamed upon the hour and 20-minute runtime. The acting skill, except for certain veteran actors, the acting skill is not really there for quite a bit of the actors because it doesn't really matter, because they're not going to be on screen for very long. Because most of them are just there to get killed. Really, this movie has upped the ante compared to its prior film, and I was like, man, this sequel is cool. But it looks cool, but there's nothing more than that. So I would go on and still give this a positive review, but it's going to be a less than compared to its original, because this sequel was, to me, kind of felt like a throwaway. I would be interested to see where a third installment would have gone. Maybe they would have had Arkin, who is to have been the villain in the third film, or maybe we would have just had the villain be the person that you're going to have to forcibly root for in the third installment, and then Arkin would be the villain technically, but we'll probably never know. But so, yeah, so that's all I feel that I have to go on and kind of talk about how my feelings were for this film. So I would say that this movie is to be a solid good film. Um, just because it just looks like, yeah. But yeah, no story. Anyways, we even had an opportunity for Arkin to have a continuation from prior film, and they didn't do a thing about that. And that was my biggest problem of well, how did Lisa go on and escape from her owning loan sharks from the prior film? How not is Arkin going to give Lisa the jewel or the gem from prior films, saying hey honey, I finally have this now, here you go. Nothing was connected from prior film. It sucks. So anyways, the only real backstory that we get is from a girl named Elena, which that was just so rushed that I didn't care. So speaking of which, let's go on and let's tee up this movie. What is it about? Even though there isn't much of real story, it's just trap, 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 trap. Anyways, so we have Elena, and Elena, it seems, is to have been in a car wreck with her father, and so we have a guy named Luciello who is to have gone on and protected Elena for her whole entire life. So Elena decides one night that she is going to go to this rave with her friends, and this rave is to have a secret code that is to have been tied to a Edgar Allan Poe movie, or Edgar Allan Poe story, which of course is, quote, The Raven Nevermore. So Elaine goes into this rave, and they really milk out the dancing in this film. Yeah, I just want to see people just jumping and jiving and whatever. And like we have this music that is easily like headache inducing. And I'm like, why are they spending so much time on that compared to the rest of the film? Like, do we just desperately need to have seen a bunch of people just be dancing? Because I guess we didn't really get much of any like intimate moments in this movie compared to the original. So I guess is this as good as it gets, right? So we have Elena who is to at some point leave into another room, which I'll get into more specifics when we get into spoilers. And Elena ends up finding this red crate, which leads her to meet up with Arkin, while every one of her friends and everybody that she knows is just being fed to the collector grinder. To where we then have Elena who is to get shoved in this box, and Arkin is to escape. But we then have Arkin who is to be kind of shoved back into trying to get to the collector, as Lucello is to, of course, desperately need Arkin's help. And Arkin is to state, it's like, well, hey man, like I'll go on and I'll I'll tell you how to get to the collector, but that's all I want to do. Like I'm not gonna come in there, like I'm not gonna tell you what to do. No, F off. Like you guys are gonna go and probably get killed, and I'm gonna go my merry way. And come to find out, not quite gonna happen for Arkin. So we end up having the group going into this kind of abandoned hotel, which is to have these massive amount of traps and things that, of course, are wildly different compared to the first movie. As well as us finding out that it seems that the collector has gone on to find all these people and make them go wild as if they are all to almost be like zombified. And so like that's a real way of like not only with all these traps and these tricks and these whatever little things that are kind of familiar to the sequel, we're also doing a bunch of other things as well to try and give us like this even grander scale than the original prior film. So that's I think all that I want to go on and talk about to tee up here. So still a solid good movie, but it is what it is. So with that said, I think it's about that double five time territory because it's really going on this time around to say it is spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time you spoil this movie. So, like I am to state, we have Mr. Peters, who is Eleanor's father. And so, Mr. Peters is stating to Eleanor that he's going to be around a lot more since Eleanor had lost her mother. And so, right after we are to go on and have them talk, we all of a sudden have them go right into this car accident. And so Mr. Peters is to have broken his leg. Eleanor is trying to get out of the car. Mr. Peters is trying to adjust his leg to try to get to Eleanor. And we have Lucello, who ends up getting Eleanor out of this car and is to protect her. We see that throughout the film. I'm just going to go on and state it all now. So I could really just get that done and over with. So we then have Elena, who is to go to this secret rave. And she's talking to all of her friends, We have Elena, who is also talking to her boyfriend, who of course is Brian. And so we come to have Brian, who is a state that he is busy, and so Elena is like, well, okay. So Elena ends up going off to this rave and is to have the secret code of Nevermore. And we all of a sudden have this weird looking guy who comes out of the shadows, clicks this remote, and opens this door. Elena goes into this rave and starts dancing with a number of people. And all of a sudden, we coinkadinkly have Elena that bumps into her boyfriend Brian, who is dancing with another woman. And so Elena's like, oh my god, my boyfriend. Ah. So Elena runs off into this other room, assuming that it might be a bathroom of some sort. So we have Elena's friend, who is Missy, who is trying to get to her. But then all of a sudden, we are starting to see traps being in place, as the collector is to be on or pretty near close to the ceiling with all of this kind of equipment that's kind of hanging around. And he's just kind of hanging in the rafters, kind of like, okay, like, let's set up all these traps. So, what ends up happening is we start to see this huge meat grinder like thing, this huge massive, it looks like there's certain kinds of farm equipment that looks similar to like this big grinder thing that ends up kind of going in a circle to kind of chop up these people. And so it goes in this circular motion and it takes out everybody in this rave, it just grinds them all up because nobody is to have been bothered to look at this thing as it's coming to them, or a lot of people are to just go on, and even the DJ is like, plah, like the DJ ends up getting hit by this. I think it's a woman. So, because there isn't enough time to really see that, it's just like, oh yeah, just like killed. I'm like, okay, I guess that didn't really matter. Nobody really mattered. So the only one that dodges this attack is to be Brian, and he gets his fingers cut off because of that. So we have Eleanor that is to find this red crate, and so she is to start to unlock this crate, and Arkin ends up stating to Eleanor, hey, get down. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this spear looking thing comes flying out of this wall to almost kill Eleanor and Arkin, and so they dodge luckily out of the way. So Eleanor ends up going out into the hallway to see her best friend getting kind of put into this cage, and this cage is to go on, and the top of it is starting to lower, starting to crush everybody down. So, as well as the collector is being on top of this cage, is kind of waiting for everyone to get killed off here. So, Missy is looking at Eleanor, and she realizes she's going to die here because there's no way out. So, Eleanor is watching her friend die. So, we had at one point where Brian, who had escaped his death, to just wind up being killed anyways. As they were running through this hallway, we had him and another girl who started running down this hallway, and they ended up hitting this tripwire that has them getting sliced. So, Arkin, who wants to get the out of here, ends up taking Brian's body, grabbing him, and Arkin had already pulled away these wood pieces from this window, and Arkin had taken Brian's body and went flying through the window to smash into this car. Arkin rolls from out of this car, and we've Arkin realizing that the collector is looking from this window, and Arkin's like, I'm getting out of here. I'm out. Deuces. And so the collector goes on to take Eleanor and puts her in the red crate and goes on to the very next trap. I'm like, wait a minute, what? There's no backstory. There's no marinating on this. It's just so rushed and so like we don't even have time to even have Elena who apologizes to her boyfriend. It's like, well, hey, like you know what, like whatever happened, like it's behind us now. Like let's just kind of figure out what's going on here. No, there's none of that. So, and then her boyfriend gets killed. So Arkin now goes to the hospital, and we have these officers that are immediately after Arkin is to get his arm reset after he broke it. They immediately slap the cuffs on this guy because I guess he might be somehow tied to this case and he might be the murderer, so they're kind of leaving suspicion out here. So we have Arkin that is now in this hospital bed trying to recover from his injuries. And we all of a sudden have this one officer who's Lin, who we'll find out is also going to be within this team. So I'm like, what, do they like not be able to find like another person that they could have quickly killed in this movie? So they have to use the cop guy as also the guy in this team. I'm so confused. Were they two different people? Did they have twin brothers? So, and I'm still trying to figure out how to pronounce Luciello. I'm probably pronouncing it correctly or wrongly. I'm not sure. So, we have Luciello, who is to now present himself in front of Arkin. And Luciello is to tell Arkin that he's like, hey, like, I need you to help me find Elena, because beyond 2 days from now, she'll probably be dead. It's like, well, yeah, in a missing case, usually that's the go-to thing to state. Like after 2 hours, or after 2 days, this person is probably going to wind up dead in a barrel somewhere. So, because they'll probably bleed out. So, Luciello is trying to guilt Arkin because it's like, well, hey, you just ran out on this girl, so like you're gonna come and you're gonna help me. And Arkin's like, okay, you got me. So we have Lisa meeting up with Arkin, and we have Lisa who notices these flowers are there, and Arkin's like, hey, you didn't have to give me flowers, and Lisa's like, well, I didn't. The person who gave him flowers was the collector. And so Arkin is telling Lisa that she needs to go to her mother's place and just kind of hide out. They do no backstory with this character. They didn't resolve what happened in the first film, and I'm freaking upset. So we have Arkin that doesn't really give these guys a heads up of what to expect here. But what Arkin does do is to state that when he ended up getting tossed into this van from the prior film, after he was to go on and get hung by those hooks, and he had those bugs almost being put into his stomach, and as well as him just kind of getting the worst treatment he could possibly get. So, because I forgot about that in a collector review, so I might as well add that in now. So, because they reshowed that scene. So Arkin goes on to state that he cut into his arm every single time they would do a left or right or center or straight or whatever. And so Arkin is to seemingly know where this guy's hideout is. So, come to find out, they go in the direction that Arkin is telling them to go, and they find this abandoned hotel, and they're like, okay, well, like this must be it, because where else would this guy uh, where else would this guy be? So Arkin is letting the guys know, it's like, well, hey, like don't like kind of sleep on this guy, because like he has all kind of traps in here, has all kinds of setup and whatever. And Luciello is like, well, good, because you're coming with us. And Arkin's like, no, I'm not. And like, yeah, you're coming with us. And so they have the guns, they have the manpower. So Arkin's like, fuck, I shouldn't agree to this. I should have just said no. But no, Arkin would have been forced in doing this regardless, because they would have put a gun to his head and told him he's going. Plus, also, Luciello is a state that he is to go on and do things that normal cops wouldn't, supposedly. So Arkin now is to have the guys go in there, and so Arkin's like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to be up first because I know what to look for where you guys have no freaking clue. So we have Elena. Elena is to be in this case, this crate, and so Elena is to poke a hole into the crate in the case, and is to start to see the collector going on and torturing somebody who he ends up kind of putting this kind of weird mask over, and is kind of setting him up to go crazed or go wild, so he can zombify this person to kill off anybody that they see. So we have the collector who's looking into the hole that Elena's looking into, and so Elena kind of backs up. So the collector kind of F's off, goes somewhere, and Elena ends up taking her bra off and is to kind of use it to open up this crate, and then she is to hide herself. The collector realizes the crate is open and is to start putting spiders in the room, to hope that Elena will scream and he'll find out where she is. But Elena doesn't go on and do anything as these spiders are crawling around. So the collector is to find out that there are people making their way into this place because there is an alarm, I believe, that goes off here. So the collector is to go on and kind of release the hounds here, so to speak, or in this case, people that are wild. So we have Arkin that goes on, and here's the thing, like, so now that this is a sequel, we should probably have Arkin that's like, well, like there is a set of things, but like who knows like what this guy will do next? Who knows how he'll up the ante next? And we really do get that. So Arkin is caught off guard by all these people who are basically almost zombies, and we have the guys who are just unloading all of these bullets, and it doesn't really seem that they have much of any real ammo, in all honesty, for these characters anyways. So we have all these armed guys who are shooting into the the zombies, and so we have them push on. So eventually, what happens as they further go into here, we have certain people who fall into these traps because it's bound to happen anyways. We go on to have a guy named Dre who ends up falling into one of these traps where he ends up getting stabbed into the shoulder, and he ends up getting killed off here. So, because it jabs pretty deep. So we push on to have our characters, and we have eventually where more and more, like, the Collector starts to separate all of the guys that are with Arkin, Lucello. Like, we have Lin, who is the outside guy, and the Collector ends up stabbing into him pretty good, and because he's outside there. And so we have Luciello and Arkin who end up finding Lin later, and Arkin is to have a bomb on him, and it seems like there's kind of bugs crawling on Lin. And so, but that's kind of a little bit getting a little ahead of myself. So we have Elena, and she is kind of making her way through all of these hallways, all of these places, and she goes on to free a girl named Abby, who seems to have this kind of like bizarre makeup on. And so Abby is to kind of clean her face, and Abby is to mention how, like, she thinks that she's the Collector's favorite, and even at some points it doesn't really have us understand what side she's working on, either with Elena or the Collector. We're not really sure. But so, as we come to find that Elena is kind of jumping over these wires, trying to avoid these traps, while Abby is to kind of huddle into this side to not be killed by the Collector, because Abby is to notice that Elena has this earpiece, and it's like, well, hey, you have a weakness, like this is all some kind of test to see like who's going to be the weaker of us. And you are, because you have this earpiece, you have this hearing aid, so you're not going to be able to hear as well as I will. So Elena runs off as the Collector now shows himself, and Elena runs off, dodging this one trap. So we go on to have Arkin, who goes through the same hallway, as he is to try and have separated himself from the rest of the pack to try and hide away here. So Arkin walks through the same hallway Elena did to not spot Abby. So Arkin goes and accidentally hits this tripwire, but dodges this thing, kind of this fork falling down. So Arkin is just like, okay, all right. So we have Arkin, who notices this, like, I want to say it's kind of like a dumbwaiter, uh, kind of little like opening thing, and Arkin is to see there's a thing of rope that is leading him down to a number of just massive dead bodies. So Arkin is to hide in this little dumbwaiter little spot for the guy named Wally to pass by, try to open this same kind of little latch that Arkin did. And Arkin is trying to hold on to the little latch that is to open up this little door. So Arkin ends up falling down onto these bodies by accident, and so now Arkin is to have to like go back up again and try to make his way through all of these things again. So we have Wally, Luciello, and Paz, who is to be the female girl, all to like get back together again. So we easily have the Collector that goes after them with this massive like hook and rope thing, and we have Wally, who ends up getting a hook to the face, and he ends up kind of getting kind of with the Collector kind of onto the other part of the rope of this hook. Like, we have the Collector that slides down, and Wally ends up kind of falling back to the ground. Or no. we had the collector that had the end of that rope being weighted. So when the collector like cuts the rope, Wally falls down to the ground, and that's what happens. And so we had Luciello, who was to try and fight the collector, but the collector ends up taking Paz instead, or Paz, and ends up torturing her. And so when Arkin and Abby re-meet up with Luciello, and they're all like, they're all hearing like Paz, who is getting tortured here. They end up going to the direction where they're hearing this sound, and they find Len's body in there. It's when the explosion happens, and so when they're further trying to go on and figure out where Paz is, they're like, well, Luciello's like, my only mission is to get Elena, and I don't really care about anything else. And Arkin's like, well, hey, she's getting tortured in there. Like, let's try to save everybody, and instead of just like thinking about like the one person that you're here to save. So come to find out, we have Arkin that is to find Paz in this kind of razor blade netting, and she's consistently getting cut by all these things. So Arkin frees her, and so they end up kind of regrouping back up again. And so Elena. Elena has made it through this hallway where there's a bunch of bear traps, and she ends up dropping her hearing aid in one of the bear traps. She kind of quickly kind of grabs this thing with her hand, and luckily the bear trap closes and doesn't get a handful of Elena's hand. So Elena kind of slowly but surely gets through this hallway, and so we finally have Elena that meets up with the rest of the group, but Elena is telling Arkin and Luciello, like, well, hey, like, that's Abby, like, don't trust her because, like, she's gonna kill you. So, but come to find out, we also find Elena, who is to find possibly this way out, because she's to see this fan that is against this wall, and she's noticing two guys that are like hobos that are kind of putting their hands next to this garbage can that seems to be on fire. So we have Elena that points it out to the rest of the group, and so Arkin is to ask Luciello, it's like, well, hey, like, how many bullets do you have? And Luciello is like, well, two. And in my brain, I'm thinking, like, can that gun be that accurate to shoot that far away to hit somebody? I don't think so. Um, but we have Arkin who ends up shooting this gun to hit this homeless person. And so the homeless person calls 911, brings a plethora of cops here. And so Arkin is to wait till the cops come, and he ends up shooting one of the cop cars, and they're like, oh, okay, like, something is going on via that hotel. So like all the cops are kind of swarming around it. We have a bunch of these firemen and ambulances, and everybody's kind of swarming around this place. So after the collector is realizing that it's like, oh, like, the police are here, so I gotta up my game. I gotta get this big gun, and I gotta, like, release my dogs. So we have the rest of the group for to go on and find these these kind of containers, or these kind of glass uh, like galleries of all of these people that the collector has just been collecting at some point. So all of this skin that is put into these water tanks, and we see a plethora of different kind of just bodies that have just been sitting there over time, maybe decomposing, maybe not. So this leads us to turn around and have Luciello and Arkin, who are going to have to fight off against the Collector and these dogs. So we have Paz, who gets, or Paz, not quite sure how it's pronounced. We have her immediately get killed by the Collector, because I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, I guess this character didn't really matter that much because she barely had any. Like, I was hoping if somebody was going to stick around, it might have been that girl, but I guess I was wrong. So that way you could have at least. But I get it. It's like thin out the herd here. Because there's only going to be a very few amount of people that survive. So, Paz dies. And we have these dogs that come out, and we have Arkin that is to kind of use his arm to that has this kind of this brace on it. And oh no, wait, does Paz die? Because we do have a longer situation here. No, I think they go back to that same room and then Paz dies. So this is a little bit earlier. So that I stated this. So Paz doesn't die, but so we have these dogs that end up kind of getting bitten onto Arkin's arm with his God, what is the word? With his so anyways, we go on the brace, the thing that he has. Let me pause here for 1 second. His cast. I was like, what is the word? His cast, his little cast. So come to find out, we have Luciello that is to have him fall backwards and fall into a kind of similar trap that Abby fell into, because Abby was to be knocked back by, or knocked out by, I think Elena, and Abby ends up falling into this trap where she gets her foot stuck, and we all of a sudden have this like metal thing that surrounds her and is a stab into her through all sides, and then Abby bleeds to death. We also had one point where Arkin was separated from the rest of the group, and there was this spot where Arkin was to have, like, on both sides of him, like these kind of spikes, but he, like, it doesn't kind of condense onto him or anything or try to crush him. So we have Lucien that is fallen back, and he is to have these two things that is stabbed into his hands. So Luciello is realizing on top of him there's to be this massive cage, or this massive kind of clamped down thing that is starting to fall. And so what Luciello does is to grab one of these dogs, so I guess the dogs can take his place. So as Luciello is telling him, hey, like, you guys need to get out of here. But what ends up happening instead is Elena, Arkin, and Paz ends up all getting stuck into this cage that ends up surrounding around them, and now the Collector is kind of looking at them with this lighter, and he's going to blow them up, leaving them in this cage. So Arkin now has to scramble to have his arm get rebroken because they gave him a knife when he was to need something to defend himself, because they wouldn't give him a gun. They ended up giving him a flashlight instead, but then they gave him a knife, finally. So when the numbers were dwindled down here, so Arkin is to tell the girls to re-break his arm so that way they can get out of this cage, and so they do. And so Arkin goes on to open this cage for them to get out of there before this explodes. So their master plan is to fall back into the dumbwaiter and slide down this rope, but that leads them right back to that same thing where Luciello was, and now they have to fight out the Collector, and so that's when Paz dies. So we have Arkin, we have Elena that are trying to go on and fight off the Collector, and then Luciello comes back to then fight off the Collector, and there's a pretty good fight out between Luciello and the Collector, but I'm assuming, I'm like, well, guess who's going to win this one? But so we have Luciello that ends up getting stabbed multiple times, and so Arkin is looking on, and so Luciello is telling Arkin, so, well, hey, like, keep Elena safe, whatever you do, blah, 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 blah. So we have Arkin who goes on to fight with the Collector and ends up kind of smacking him around and kind of pushing him around. And so Arkin at one point is to toss him through this same chute that Arkin has been through now twice, and he is to see that there's already flames being lit, and so he rips off the shirt, tosses this flame to, of course, light the Collector on fire. And so Elena is trying to bash onto this door. We had the firefighters who were hearing her, and so they end up kind of taking all this stuff, and they cut with the jaws of life to try to open these doors. So Arkin finds himself to be trapped in a wall of fire that Elena can't get to him with. So Elena has to see all these tanks with all these bodies inside of it, and she ends up smashing all of them, releasing all of this water so that way Arkin could get to her, and so they can both run out of this building. And so that's when the doors immediately fall after that. And so after this, there is to, of course, have Arkin with his arm in a brace, because Paz was to reset his injury and was to kind of put his arm in a brace. So, but then I think while Arkin was fighting the Collector, maybe he got out of the brace. Anyways, so either way, we have Arkin who's looking on and is to see just the mask of the Collector. And Arkin's like, this isn't done. Like, he's still out there somewhere. Like, I didn't see him die. So the next thing we end up seeing is a man who goes into his home with all of these bugs, all of these insects in these jars. And so we all of a sudden have Arkin who shows up at this guy's home, and it's to state, it's like, well, yeah, like it took me a while, like it took me like a number of different people to kind of look through, but I finally found you. And so Arkin now goes on to toss the Collector into this red case, and Arkin is planning on what he's going to do for the Collector. and we just kind of roll credits here, and that's what we kind of see, that like Arkin is coming up with some master plan, or we're assuming somewhere later on that we're going to see maybe Arkin as the collector. Maybe uh, we're going to have the collector that all of a sudden is to find all the bad people beyond just the collector and obtain all of them and put them in one place and try to kill them all off. Maybe that could be what the third movie or third installment would be, but I'm going to try to get out of here as I'm to go on and probably realize that there was a number of things or a number of scenarios of which that I probably forgot for this film. There's a lot of complicated things going into this film, but otherwise, I think I'm going to just get out of here. So, thank you for going on and listening for any portion of this. Appreciate it. But yeah, bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.